Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be opening this session today on climate change and monsoons. Floods are one of the most common and one of the most devastating natural disasters happening on this planet. They impact hundreds of millions of people every year, causes thousands of fatalities, and billions of economic damage. And the countries that are most vulnerable are the ones that don't have early warning systems. At Google, we believe AI has a role to play. In 2018, we launched the Flood Forecasting Initiative using machine learning models to predict floods and send alerts. Last year, we sent 115 million alerts to 23 million people over search and maps. During the floods in Pakistan last summer, we sent global SOS alerts, alerting people and giving them the resources they need from the government authorities. And now we are scaling our efforts. Last week, we announced that we are expanding our flood forecasting services to 18 more countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. We launched the Google Flood Hub, which is a portal where you can go and check on a map flood forecasts. You can see where and when we predict the next floods. We believe those resources are going to help the people who are going to be impacted, but also the government organizations and the NGOs to help them tackle those challenges. We are committed to scaling this service to more countries. Again, thank you for being here. This is a very important session, and I'm looking forward to the panelists and the discussion. Thank you.
Hi again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're here to talk about the monsoon, and monsoons are incredibly powerful, and we've seen very recently the devastation that monsoons can bring, but monsoons are also a thing of beauty, and they can be the source of life. They can be the economic engines of countries. And so when the monsoon changes, it can be really just catastrophic for many countries that really depend on the rains, and that depend on the rains at the right times. So we're going to talk about the science of monsoons first, and we're going to talk about the human impact of what has happened to monsoons in a climate-changed world. This is going to be a hybrid panel, and you're going to get a treat. You're going to see some really beautiful work that my colleagues have done on the screen shortly. I want to first introduce our first speaker, who's going to walk us through the science of how monsoons are changing. So we're going to focus on that first. We're going to focus on monsoons and their relationship to climate science. And then we're going to have speakers up on stage to talk about the human toll of the changing monsoon, the human toll of extreme rainfall, and how do you prepare yourselves, your communities when that happens. So, shall I sit when I do this conversation with Roxy, or shall I stand? Yes, I shall sit. So I'm going to begin first by welcoming Dr. Roxy Matthew Cole, who is a climate scientist at the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. He is joining us virtually from Pune, India. So hang on while I take my seat and then say hello.
Thank you so many. I hope
Hi,
you
Roxy.
can hear me.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can see you tiny over there.
Okay. Good, and I can hear you. That's the most important thing, and I can see those images behind you as well on your computer. So,
right.
it's great to have you you with us. Help us first understand what is the normal pattern of the monsoon and why it's important to have that pattern, and what has changed? How has anthropogenic climate change, man-made climate change, altered the monsoon?
The word monsoon itself means changing winds. So it's a play of winds, particularly for a region like South Asia. And annually, the changing winds, with the changing winds, we have winds blowing from the Indian Ocean, the warm Indian Ocean, blowing over the Indian subcontinent, or you can call the South Asian subcontinent, bringing all that moisture evaporated from the Indian Ocean and dumping onto the subcontinent during the months of June, July, August, and September. That's the northern summer for us. These are huge winds, huge amount of winds, carrying a lot of moisture. So for a region like South Asia, where you have 1.7 billion people, that's about 1/4 of the global population. So for this region, more than 3/4 of the annual rain falls during these summer monsoon months, when the wind goes from the Indian Ocean to the subcontinent, like as you see on the screen right now. Yeah, exactly. And
So that's the
as you
normal
know,
pattern. That's
yeah,
the normal pattern, yeah?
that's the
What's-
normal pattern.
And
That's the
based
normal
on
pattern.
this normal pattern, farmers sow their seeds.
Right, right. As the monsoon onsets from the south of India in early June, the farmers start sowing their seeds for the agriculture. And as we know, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, these are agrarian communities where more than 60%, despite the improvement in irrigation, more than 60% of the agriculture still depends on rainfed, are still rainfed. So any changes in these monsoon patterns during these months can affect the agriculture, that's the food security, and also the water security and essentially the economic security of the region.
What has changed? How has anthropogenic climate change altered this pattern that you've described?
The monsoon patterns itself have changed. So generally we used to have moderate rains spread throughout the season. Now we are having long dry periods intermittent with short spells of heavy rains. That's a clear signal of climate change. So there is this property of global warming. When the air is much more warmer, it can hold more moisture. Not only more moisture, but also it can hold it for a longer time. So it doesn't rain for a long time. But when it rains, it dumps all that moisture in a short span of time. So you get a season's or a month's rain in a few days to a few hours. So events like cloudbursts, localized heavy rainfall events happen. We already see a 3-fold rise in extreme rainfall events causing floods across parts of India. And this is causing a lot of floods. And at the same time, because of these long dry periods, we see, like this year, the monsoon started very late. So the farmers were, so it affected the agriculture of northwest India and Pakistan. These were regions which were already hit by a season-long heat wave. If you remember, the India-Pak heat waves in March, April, May. So all this is happening along with the change in monsoon patterns affecting the security of this region.
You and I talked during that heat wave in India. Can you describe how you felt it, how you and your family felt that heat wave briefly?
Right. I remember that discussion with you.
Yeah.
And it shows that it's not just the farmers that is affected. Even as a climate scientist, I was affected by that heat wave in India. So my son, it was post-COVID, and the schools had just started. It was searing heat in May, one of the strongest heat waves in India. And my son was suddenly going to school after 2 years. And when he comes back, the schools used to close at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And this was the peak of the heat wave. And I remember how he used to come after over his school bus with all the heat and the sun flashing on his head and body. And he used to come home kind of sick and was not in a condition to sit or stand. He just popped on his bed and he wanted to rest. He didn't want to go out and play. So this was the kind of scenario we used to have during those heat waves in India.
So if I understand you correctly, a hotter atmosphere holds more moisture.
Right.
So that's what explains the extreme bursts of rainfall. So long periods of dry and then a big burst of rain. And you're saying that is a classic signal of climate change.
Right.
But what about specific extreme weather events or specific extreme rainfall events? Can you tie those to climate change?
Well, I would say we are past that point where we investigate each and every event and try to tie that event to climate change. We already know that South Asia is a poster child of climate change because we see all these extreme events thrown one after another: heat waves, extreme rainfall events, sea level rise, storm surges, and also compound events where these events combine to exacerbate the impact on the continent. And we see a clear trend on all these events. So we have reached that point where we urgently need mitigation and adaptation, particularly local adaptation to these events, because even though climate change is global, the impacts have been always felt locally.
So this is my last question. Now that you have explained this science, how can this science help prepare communities better? How can it help either countries, regions, adapt to what is likely to be more extreme rainfall patterns?
Right. So one way is through early warning systems, but we can't wait every year for early warning systems. They can provide the forecast at a 3-day advance. So we can say, okay, you can take quick measures every year, but still lives and livelihoods are lost. So we need policy to avoid these short-term and long-term losses due to unexpected stampede of events that are happening every year. We need policies both at local, district, and national levels so that we can adapt to these kind of changes.
What's your top line? What's the most effective way to adapt?
Elect leaders at local, district, national, and international levels who are aware of climate change, who can bring in those changes in terms of mitigation and adaptation. That's the strongest message I can. Because without that, there is no way forward.
I think that's a really wonderful place to wrap up the conversation with you and bring up our panelists here. So thank you very much. Thank you. So the scientists' recommendation for adaptation is to vote and vote wisely. Is this too loud? Should I move this down? Okay. I am delighted, really pleased to welcome our two panelists here up on stage. Aisha Siddiqa, a human rights and land defender from Pakistan. Please join. And Minister Seve Bayanu from Tuvalu. Minister Seve, you're the Minister of Finance, and you've had extensive experience with climate impacts. Tuvalu is the fourth smallest nation in the world.
It is.
But already 2 of your archipelago of 9 islands are on the verge of going underwater.
Sinking.
Yeah. Now, you were talking earlier about the extremes of rainfall that your nation has experienced. Can you walk us through that? What are the extremes? When did they happen, and what impact did they have on you?
Yes. So we have 2 extreme weather events as far as rainfall is concerned. Right now, we're experiencing a very dry and drought situation. So we are now asking for assistance from the international community to support us, provide water. Let me describe the context for Tuvalu. Tuvalu is a low-lying atoll, barely 1 or 2 meters above the sea level. So when there is heavy rainfall, combined with high spring tides, and together with strong wind, which we call storm surge, the waves just break through the land, across from one side to the other side. It takes everything in its way, destroying livestock, vegetation, plantation, and the infrastructure, services in its wake. When we talk about adaptation, in the context of Tuvalu, there is no option. We cannot relocate to any higher ground. There is no high ground. We cannot build upward. We only have 2-story building. That's the highest in Tuvalu. So that's the reality we are facing. And increasingly, there is a frequency of high, heavy rainfall combined with high tides, spring tides, and strong storm surge that keeps on, and it's becoming intensifying and more frequent. And that's the situation we are faced with.
Is there any way to take adaptation measures or to take measures to protect people and their livelihoods when these extreme rains come?
Well, we just have to brace ourselves. There is no other means. We just have put up shutters and raise our house floor higher off the ground so that the storm surge comes underneath. But that's only temporary. But the devastation and the impact, the damage has already been done. And then the recovery, we have to go through that reconstruction phase.
Yeah.
But it will come a time where we won't be able to reconstruct fast enough due to the damage that is caused by those extreme weather events, which is becoming intensifying and frequent.
You won't be able to recover fast enough until the next one comes.
Exactly.
I want to ask you, Aisha, about recovery. What does it look like now on the ground?
So for context, I'm Pakistani, and my family lives in the northern region of Pakistan in a tribal community called Mochiwala. The losses and damages as a result of the floods have kept accumulating. They have not stopped. The rain might have stopped, but the losses and damages are increasing every day. And the flood water was expected to sit still for 2 to 4 months in some parts of the country. Sitting water is food, and it's like glory for mosquitoes. So we have tornadoes of mosquitoes, parts of the country, and this is not a hyperbole, you couldn't see the sky That's how many mosquitoes were there, and the mosquitoes carry diseases, cholera, malaria, dengue. It's affecting everybody from ages 4 years old to 80 years old. Our healthcare system is unable to support that. We don't have enough drips, we don't have enough beds, we don't have enough rice, we don't have enough grain, and we don't have enough tents to get people out.
Even now.
Even now.
Who is paying the highest price in your country as a result of these floods?
Yeah, price is an interesting word because I think we like to talk about climate change in a language of value and profit. The people paying the price are women and children. Because of this flood, women are 2 times more likely to experience domestic violence. Women in general are 80% more likely to face the effects of climate change all over the world. So the people actually leaving their tents, leaving their homes to get the grain, to get the fresh water, to get food for their children are the women. And when the flooding happened, when people had to escape, the ones that were abused the most or taken advantage of most were young girls. Murders happened. Girls were kidnapped. They were lost. They were raped as a result of these floods. So it wasn't just natural disaster. It is becoming a humanitarian disaster of such massive scale, and it's going to happen again next year.
It's going to happen again?
Again next year. Monsoons are going to come. I mean, the climate is changing so fast. We are experiencing 30% more heat waves than ever before. The rainfall was more than it has been in 60 years. They're going to happen again.
Yeah, you were saying, we were having this discussion with Dr. Roxy Matthew Cole about the heat wave earlier in the year, and many parts of Pakistan and India, of course, suffered from the same heat wave. Tell us your experience, your family's experience with that.
Yeah, I think in order to understand the context of the floods, you need the full picture, and the full picture starts spring in Pakistan. Temperatures were 122 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 50 degrees Celsius. At 104 degrees Fahrenheit, your body cannot withstand the outside temperature. It starts collapsing in on itself. Your heart stops, your vessels contract, and you experience heat stroke. You experience heart attacks. And this wasn't just in Pakistan, this was happening in India, this was happening in Bangladesh. So my dad was in the country at that time. My dad he's in his midlife, he's 54. He's a really big man, and he ended up in the hospital. My baby cousins have cholera. And that is so extremely dangerous when you don't have access to fresh water because there's just so much flooding. 40% of the water in Pakistan is groundwater.
Right.
And the heat strokes, I think the testimony that the scientists gave above, my friend Disha is in the room, she can talk about that as well. When it is so hot, you don't want to do anything. So of course the kids come home and they collapse, but the economy stops. Workers can't work. In Pakistan, we have 10 to 12 hours of blackouts still in parts of the country. So not only is it hot, our fans don't work. If people can afford air conditioning, they can afford it. That doesn't work. And those who can't even then adapt, they rely on generators. We have a massive energy crisis at the same time. So it is one chaotic incident, plus another, it's conglomerate.
It's like compounding. One on top of the other. Yeah. The economic damages and losses, of course, of this last round of flooding is estimated to be $30 billion US. There's a very heated conversation happening here about finance. Minister, you have been hearing these conversations for a long time, right? You've been hearing, look, climate impacts are really expensive. And if you don't reduce emissions, it's going to be even more expensive, right?
Exactly.
So what's your assessment of this conversation you're hearing this year on finance and the promises that have been made on finance?
Yeah, we are optimistic and we are encouraged by the promises and the pledges. But the problem is we don't get to see the money. And to get to have that money now, that's the problem. So promises and pledges are made, and this was also done back in Glasgow last year at the COP. But until now, we don't see any funding trickle down to the communities that need the money. So it's a question of accessibility for many of our small island developing states. It's one question of putting money in a kitty, but it's another challenge to access that money. Coming to Egypt, to this COP, Tuvalu has developed a long-term adaptation plan because the only way to save Tuvalu is to build more land and build up. That's the only way because we cannot go in or we cannot go out currently to escape from these extreme weather events. That is the true cost of adaptation in Tuvalu's context.
Can you describe that? Like, what would that look like?
For those of people that have seen and been to Maldives, an island atoll in the Indian Ocean, South Indian Ocean, they have actually got the technology to build new islands out of nowhere. So they're dredging material from deep ocean and build up. So they've got 25 story building built on man-made islands. So for us in Tuvalu, that technology is available. That's the only way to save small, low-lying atoll nations. But there is a cost that comes to it. And that is our plea here at Egypt, at the COP, that the true cost of adaptation is inclusive of protection of our land to enable our people and our community to continue to live as they have survived over so many generations.
Some of the Pacific Island countries are also proposing something called a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Can you talk about that?
So Tuvalu is co-sponsoring
Yes?
that treaty along with Vanuatu. And on Friday, we will be launching that declaration. It's to promote the non-proliferation of fossil fuel use. And obviously, as we know it, carbon emissions contribute over 50% to greenhouse gases emissions that contribute to global warming and climate change. So if all of the countries are able to sign up to this treaty and ensure that they commit to delivering their commitment to reducing fossil fuel, that would go a long way to minimizing already the impact that we are seeing now, the loss and damage impact that we are seeing, and we are living it in Pakistan, in Nigeria, across the world, and in Tuvalu, and in the low-lying atoll nations.
I want to come back to loss and damage, but just want to remind the audience that, you know, as you've heard for the whole day, there are cards on your table. If you have questions, and if you've written down some questions, please raise your hand, and a mic runner will come to you immediately. So the lights are so bright, I can't quite see yet, but please do prepare some questions. Let's talk about the loss and damage conversation, because that is really the most contentious, you know, issue here. Has there been progress? You've been at this game for a long time, Minister Sebu. So how do you describe this moment?
I think there has been progress made. For several years and decades, we've been talking about loss and damage. In Glasgow, there was an agreement for establishing a Glasgow dialogue on funding arrangements for loss and damage. We take comfort by the fact that at the opening of this COP, there was an agreement on the agenda to include matters relating to funding arrangements for addressing loss and damage. There is a footnote, however, that the parties do not want to speak about and talk about and discuss liability and compensation. But be that as it may, there is now an entry point for discussing financial arrangements relating to loss and damage. The position by small island states and supported by AOSIS, the least developed country status, countries, LDCs, is that this is the COP that we need to get agreement on establishing a special response fund for loss and damage. What I'm hearing from the other party is that they want to push back on that. They rather prefer that there is a gap analysis done on the existing financial arrangements, not only within the convention, the financial mechanism within the convention, but across the multilaterals. And only then would they be happy to discuss whether there is justification for establishing a specific funding mechanism for loss and damage. But we are already suffering from the impact and the damages and the losses caused by climate change, as we have heard in Pakistan, in Nigeria, even in the United States, the communities are being affected. So there is no doubt and there is no question about the need for support towards loss and damage. And this is what we will continue to talk about over the next couple of weeks.
Do you want to add something on loss and damage? Otherwise, I have one last question in our 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, I would love to. I think we have talked in numerics about how much Pakistan has suffered economically. I come from a tribal community in northern Pakistan. My family has lived on the land for 8,000 years. When the floods came, even our graves drowned. We have a connection to the land that is beyond just it giving to us, but also we relate to it like a relative. And when you lose your home, when you watch the community that has provided for you, the earth that has provided for you, the earth that your ancestors are buried in complete destruction, no dollar value can be put on that. We are losing beyond just agriculture, we are losing culture. We are losing peoples, lifestyles, languages. It is extinction for my people is not a new concept. We have had to fight for our survival time and time again, and we've been able to adapt. But to this, we cannot adapt. To the constant damages that have been coming from the natural disaster, that have been coming from corporations polluting our water, that has been coming from the fossil fuel industry, because we can sit here and talk about climate change, but we also need to acknowledge there's a reason why we are in this mess. This is a man-made mess, yes, but there are corporations behind this man-made mess, and they keep pushing out the fossil fuel so that communities like mine are on the verge of extinction. Communities like Tuvalu are literally drowning and pleading for their lives, and countries are saying, prove it.
We are out of time. I thank you both for being here. It's been my honor to join you here. Thank you to our audience.